It's July 5th, 2024, and I'm with Mr. John Jeckovich. He was a teenage boy during World War II, the Battle of the Bulge. The division before him, 106, just about everyone was slaughtered, plus except a couple young men.
Right.
I was talking about the 106th. The 106 were at the wrong place at the wrong time when there was 100,000 British and Americans in the center and 400,000 Nazis at the outside. You guys were kind of boxed in. That was Hitler's last chance, his last attempt. And at this time he probably knew that was his end, and his idea was, I'm going to take a lot of British and I'm going to take a lot of Americans out with me. Well, Mr. Jeckovich was shot up a couple times. Luckily, the machine gun shell went through his shoulder, didn't hit a bone, and came right out in his shoulder area. Then he's got shrapnel in his leg. They sent him over to hospitals in Paris, a couple, 2 or 3 months, put a couple bandage on it, make sure he's able to walk, make sure he's able to pull a trigger, and said, you're back in, sent you right back in the fight. They were short on people, that's what they did. So here we are, we're reading Mr. Jeckovich's book, Their Mother's Sons, which is a long book. It's about 900 pages. And that book is simply about, from kindergarten to his retirement, it goes through the phases of school, being drafted. Mr. Jeckovich did not enlist. He wanted to be drafted so he could stay there as long as possible to take care of his mother, because his father recently died about a year earlier. So he didn't want to enlist. He wanted to wait to the last minute to get drafted so he could take care of his mother, and that's where the book came from, Their Mother's Sons.
And that probably saved his life, because the D-Day, you know.
He would have, yes. If he enlisted, he would probably wouldn't have been D-Day, could have been the first wave. But he was in the Battle of Bulge, was still a bloody mess. Took a lot of soldiers killed, a lot of soldiers. And so where we're at right now on the book, we're on chapter 7, and this is Overseas and Beyond. Overseas and Beyond, and we just ended chapter 6. That's Home on Furlough to Anne. Let me briefly just tell you about chapter 6. Mr. Jeckovich bounced around to Fort Sam Houston, several other training camps in the southeast, and then he ended up being sent to Camp Breckenridge, which is another training camp. This is all before he was sent to Europe. And at this Camp Breckenridge, which was only a stone's throw from Owensboro, Kentucky. So when he got a weekend pass, he went down there and he had to hurry back to get to the bus to get to camp, and he got sidetracked. He got miles and miles away from the downtown area where the bus station was. He ended up in a residential area, and he'd seen these 2 young girls there, and he said, hey, do you know how to get to the bus station? And they hit it off pretty well. And the girls say, yeah, one was Ann, and the other one was Mar. They said, hey, we'll take you there. So they took you there, and that was the beginning of a relationship with Ann. He's seen her many, many times. Marriage was on the table many times, but he couldn't do it for a few reasons. Number one, he had to take care of his mother. Number two, he didn't want to get married before he went to Europe, because he might not come back, or he might come back completely disabled, and he didn't want to put this burden on Anne. So he got a 15-day furlough, and they give you a 15-day furlough before they're going to send you to the combat. He got the 15-day furlough, and he says, I'm going to spend it with Ann, which is only 40 miles away from Camp Breckenridge, but he couldn't do it. The guilt ate him up, and he got on the train and bus and every other damn thing he could get on, and he went to Niagara Falls, New York to spend the time, the 15 days with his mother and his sister. Sister's name was Sally. He got there was no one home. He remembered they hid the key in the milk box. He went in there, and Sally, the youngest girl, was not working. She was in school, and the mother was working at Carborundum. So he's sitting in there alone and with his uniform on, and looking around the house. He wasn't really happy because, I can't believe I really lived here. This is not much. I'm talking about how you entered the house coming back on furlough. And his sister showed up eventually. She gave him a nice hug and greeted him. But she said, "Hey, I gotta go. Nice to see you. I got my girlfriends waiting for me." So he didn't eat all day, so there's leftover meatloaf in the fridge. He had some of it, not all of it. And I guess he made a sandwich out of leftover meatloaf. Long story short, his mother finally gets off of work from Carborundum. She comes in, greets him, everything's fine, until she finds out who ate most of the meatloaf. "Hey, Mom, I'm hungry. I've been on a bus and trains and everything else for hours I didn't eat." And she gave him a dirty look, and so he knew what that meant, and he went into the living room and sat down. And then he heard pots and pans making a lot of racket. And that's his mother's way of saying, "Hey, I'm angry. You should have not ate the meatloaf." Don't believe it, but that's the story. She was angry, and I guess things settled down a bit. Whatever meatloaf was left, they made and served him some type of dinner. Shortly after dinner, his sister Sally gets up and his mother gets up. "Hey, we'll see you later. We're going to the movies."
Yeah.
Correct? We're going to the movies.
Yeah, we go to the movies.
And they're going to the movies, spend no time with them. And they said, "It's so important we go to the movies because they're giving out these dish collections and we don't want to miss the dish. We don't want to miss the dish." And so he left them basically there.
Civil War.
They left him basically at the house alone.
That's what?
When they went to the movies, they left you alone at the house
Yeah.
to get the dish.
I was on furlough.
Yeah, you're on furlough. And just to sum it up, Mr. Jeckovich is now stating, "I think I made a mistake. I should have seen Ann." So now he's planning to cut his trip in half in Niagara Falls by a week and make arrangements to see Ann. And so it's another problem. He can't use the phone at the house. Why, I don't know. So he'd go to the bus station or someplace to try to reach Ann and let him know what the plans.
Railroad depot downtown.
Where'd you go?
Railroad depot.
Railroad depot to call his girlfriend Ann.
On Fall Street.
Call his girlfriend Ann. And it was another interesting fact. You went to Hyde Park, which is like a sporting arena, to take your showers.
Yeah.
Why didn't you take a shower at the house or a bath at the house?
We didn't have a shower. We had a bathtub.
And then what, was there no hot water?
There was hot water. I had that little stove down at the foot of the stairs in the cellar.
So-
You heat that up to get the water.
So it'd be better to go to the Hyde Park,
And it's clean and nice today. I walked in there. I did that
Hot
every
water.
day. Yeah.
hot water. And so then Mr. Jeckovich made plans and to leave a week early. He worked a week early, and it was on a Sunday, and he remembers quite clearly that nothing really good happened. It was just like his mother gave him a list of stuff to do, and she'd get home from work. She says, "Is that all you do?"
Right.
Your mother would say, "Is that all you did today as far as the list?" And she says, "Is all you're doing is sit around here eating and drinking? I'm working." And so, long story short, he left a week early, and he left at the same, so there wasn't so much commotion. He left to get the bus to the train station to go down to Owensboro at the same time that his mother and Sally were walking to church. His mother never drove. She's a devout Catholic. And his mother always prayed that when she leaves this earth, she wants to be kneeling at the altar rail, taking her communion, but that didn't happen. So Mr. Jeckovich arranged the trip so they could all leave at the same time. So Mr. Jeckovich is walking to the bus station, and his mother and his sister Sally are walking to the church the opposite direction. Mr. Jeckovich looked back many, many times as they're walking their separate ways, just as a memory, just as a memory, and he noticed they never looked back once. They turned the corner, and that was the last he's seen of them for several years. Could you make any other comments about that week furlough that you had?
At home?
Yeah, that just at home.
Well, we just went home and had the regular ritual at home.
And he had a work list to do?
And it was the same routine. You got to do this. You got to do this. I'm working hard. You got to help me out. All that shit.
But your mother was working at Carbrundum then, right?
She worked at Kreski's for a while.
So she kept two jobs.
And she worked at Carbrundum, and then she worked Dr. Wright's house to clean it up there.
So she's a hard-working lady.
Yeah.
I think if you go back a couple of days, you can see where I read chapter 6, but I think I might have missed a lot of key points. Is there anything else you remember from your week furlough at home?
At home?
Yeah.
Well,
you said something about orange juice. I remember.
Yeah. Well, orange juice was the neighborhood's still the same. I used to avoid the neighbors. He said, "How you doing, John? I'm sorry you have to be in the service. You got a tough luck, bad, all that shit. I don't want to listen to that."
So when you went to take a shower or use the phones, you would go down the alleyways to avoid the neighbors, so you didn't have to socialize with people with their things that they might say that were just rhetoric. So what else do you remember about that?
Well, I went down the bus stop at Margaret Street in Hyde Park. I took it downtown and then took the bus from there for Buffalo.
Was there many men in uniform on that bus trip?
No.
You said it was when you went home on furlough, it felt very odd and unusual to open up a refrigerator.
Yeah, because I was in the military barracks for a while. I didn't have a refrigerator.
Nothing like that.
So.
Wow. Yeah, it's so interesting.
But that was what anybody my age did that time.
Every teenager did that.
Yeah.
Well, you had two brothers were teenagers. Did they do that?
Well, I say Lucky, and that's listed in the Coast Guard. He went as far as Hawaii.
Did he go to active duty?
That was he. Yeah.
Did he go to the front line?
What front line? There was no front line in Hawaii.
Okay, I know that, but did they ever go to the front line?
Why would they go to the front line?
I'm just trying to make the point. Out of the three brothers, you're the only one that's seen combat duty. Is that correct?
Well, I want to see combat duty last time too.
Yeah. Okay.
See, they say they look at it. Say look, he was dead.
You said your brother Steve, he ended up in somewhere in New York or something, teaching people to drive cars. Is that what happened?
Well, he's trying to make a business out of that. That didn't work out.
I see.
He wrecked a fire hydrant and hit a person with a dead.
Okay, Mr. Jeckovich, I'm going to start on chapter 7, overseas and beyond. So this is the point here where you're done with your furlough, you're done with visiting Ann, and now it's here. They're shipping you to Europe. They're shipping you to Wales.
Well, I went back to 75th Division. That's the year that went over. I went over the division. And we wound up in Wales.
Would you like to read chapter 7, or would you like me to?
What?
Would you want to read the chapter 7, or you want me to?
No, go ahead.
All right, what is your dog tag number?
420965.
That's the passcode. I will read. Chapter 7, page 151. Overseas and beyond. I was pleased with myself, not so much in preparing the breakfast, but in fact, I had done something for Ann, truly as an act of love. I knew that she would perceive it as such, and I could see it in her face when she would look at me and smile. You're still in Owensboro with Ann and you're working your way out. We spent the rest of the day enjoying one another's company and resigning ourselves to the fact that our time together had just run out. It's it, it's done. We had done all that we could possibly do at this time, and we would resolve the marriage issue at a later date under different and less trying circumstances. I knew I loved her very much, and I would come back to her and we would have a life together. Our last days together made me feel like a condemned man waiting to be executed. Is that just Army talk?
Who's getting executed?
Ann knew I loved her very much. This is not your words, not mine. Ann knew I loved her very much, and that I would come back to her and we would have a life together. Our last day together made me feel rather like a condemned man waiting to be executed. It was just an expression you made.
Yeah, well.
On one hand, I wanted to get the ordeal of departing over with. On the other hand, I did not want our final departure to arrive. I went to church with Ann and her mother. Were they Catholics?
Yeah.
They were?
Yeah.
I went to church with Ann and her mother. After church, we went to Trotter's for lunch, for brunch. What was Trotter's?
Travis was a nice place in Pine Angel.
Nice place?
Yeah.
Ann looked radiant, and I could not keep my eyes off of her. I was proud to be in her company and felt saddened and disheartened at the thought of not seeing her after today. I knew that I was going to miss her terribly and wondered how I was going to adjust to her absence. The thought of going back to camp and not being able to see her again for an indefinite period of time sent quivers of desperation throughout my entire being. Ann drove us back to the house and we sat in the living room trying to make small talk. Miss Mahaney, that's Ann's mother, made me promise to write regularly and tell them how I was doing, and above all, where I was located, so they'd be able to write back.
Well, they never get the location. They censor it out.
I understand. The
Yeah.
Army wouldn't allow you to give you a location.
No.
But did you ever write them any letters?
Yeah.
You wrote Ann letters?
I ain't not as much as my mother.
Okay. I promised I would, and glanced at Ann. She appeared distressed, even though she was pretending to smile. I loved her even more at the moment. Ann suggested I collect all my things from upstairs and that she would help me. As we entered the room I had occupied, she burst into tears and threw herself on the bed. I sat beside her, rubbing her back, trying to comfort her as best as I could. She turned her head towards me, the tears running down her cheeks, and they looked up at me. Sighing, she said, why did you get lost anyways? She meaning, why did you get lost? Why did you end up on her street? And then she met you that way. Why did you get lost anyways? Why couldn't you have just gone to Evansville instead of coming here? Then I would be perfectly happy not knowing you. My life was very simple and straightforward, with only my schoolwork and my mother to worry about. Now I can never return to what used to be. I'll be constantly concerned about your safety, and if I'll ever come back to see you, I wish it never happened. She quickly regained her composure and said she did not mean all those things she had just said and was sorry for having said them. I kissed her and held her, saying I understood, and I loved her all the more for getting upset over my leaving. And yes, I would be back for her one way or the other. She held me tightly her body trembling as I held her, her hair falling into her face. I brushed it aside and wiped away some tears. I was upset, but also trying to control my angst. Anne suggested we should go for a drive, and it was time for me to leave. I agreed, went downstairs, and said my final goodbye to Miss Mahaney. She hugged me and began to cry, stating that she would miss me and that she would pray for my safe return. I kissed her gently on the cheek and thanked her for all her kindness and generosity. She stood in the doorway, waved goodbye as Anne and I drove away. I felt saddened and forlorn by the experience, and I knew I missed them both dearly. We had no particular place in mind, but just wanted to drive around a short while. We did not say much as we drove, but just little bursts now and then. I said I would write as soon as I could, and I'd give you my address and my phone number on a piece of paper that would have them permanently. I also stated I'd probably see her once again in a short while, even though it'd be only on an overnight pass. I would call her after 2,100 hours, one way or another. She nodded, held her head in agreement as to what I was saying, but I could see that she was becoming more tense and was closer to saying goodbye. Minutes?
8.
I suggested we go to Big Al's for a cup of coffee. She nodded in agreement. Anne wanted only coffee, as I did. As we sat there, the laughter and the noise of the crowd generated made her more apprehensive, and she wanted to leave. We drove around a bit and finally wound up at the bluff. It was still fairly early and still lights outside, with only a few cars in the area. We sat there and talked as we had on so many other occasions. But this time was different. There would be no more opportunities to sit and talk and look at the lights below. There was one last time here together, and it presented itself altogether almost disagreeable perspective. As it grew dark, I pressed close to Anne as she put her head on my shoulder. I kissed her softly and told her how fortunate I was to have met her. She grasped my hand, held it firmly, and said she did not want to see it end, that she would miss me and think of me every time she entered her room or the spare room that I occupied. I told her I would cherish all the memories of her and she would make some plans for my return to her. She said that she had thought about that, but I did not say anything just yet. I took her in my arms and began to kiss her, trying to preserve the moment in my memory. After a few minutes, she quietly said it was getting late and we should start to the bus station. She drove there in silence, each with our own thoughts. The bus was waiting there with a driver that I was familiar with. He waved to us, showed 5 fingers indicating there were 5 minutes before he left. Anne was trembling, and I held her and kissed her on the cheeks. They were moist. She handed me a small photograph of herself and said, "Keep it for good luck." I turned and waved. I could see that she was crying while she was waving the bus goodbye.
6.
Riding alone in the bus back to camp, I felt forlorn and dejected. I could not look forward to being with Anne in the near future and perhaps never again. The thought of it shrouded me with the feeling of despair and anguish. Once again, I've been cheating out of something I so desperately wanted, deprived of it yet another time. I felt heartsick for Anne, for I knew she expected more of me relative to marriage or even an engagement. I regretted the decision I had made, and here it was. I had left her side not for 5 minutes, and I was already laminating. I tried to temper my emotions during my whole time with the Army relative to my family situation, but I could never completely dissolve it satisfactorily. She sensed my concern, but would never openly discuss it. Perhaps that is why I had such a difficult time with it. If she only brought it up, perhaps we would be the two of us come to some positive solution. There was only the conjecture now. I had lost her, and it was strictly through my own prescriptive conditioning. It was not only being enthusiastic about marriage, but the excuses I forwarded were trivial. My concern for my mother's attitude regarding our relationship was asinine and inappropriate. The mere fact she would object to the marriage was irrelevant. She would either have to adjust to it or go her own separate way. Granted, I'd find it unsettling to have leave her and Sally alone, but that was one of the undisputable and reconcilable tenets of growing up. But despite all this meaningless rhetoric, I do not honestly believe my mother would have ever, I don't honestly believe my mother would have honestly reconciled herself to someone unknown to herself on a such short notice without a hint of it ever happening. There is also the perception of our both backgrounds.
3.5.
Anne would soon graduate with college with the anticipation of a fairly lucrative career ahead of her. Where areas my potential to match her accomplishments were slight to non-existent. How would I support a lifestyle so dissimilar to mine? Our social backgrounds were diametrically opposite directions. Where would we live? Kentucky or New York? What provisions would we make for her mother, who she was, and rightly so, concerned about? There was also questions that turned into my mind at different times and which finally resulted into indecision and frustrations. Do you have any comments or you want me to keep reading?
No, go ahead.
The foremost question was time. I had scarcely known Anne for 6 months, and already we're talking about marriage. Sitting alone on the bus brought me back to reality of our situation. I'm sure Anne would come to the same conclusion. What I was doing was trying to rationalize our relationship. If I loved Anne, and I said I believe I did, I should do something concrete to reinforce the affirmation of love. Anything else was meaningless. That I did not say anything of this nature said one of two things. I did not love her as much as I declared, or my emotional instability was much greater than I realized or understood. Whatever the case, I was quick to understand that I made a grievous error in judgment, which was to torment me for a very long period. Minutes?
1 minute, 40 seconds.
My love for Anne did not diminish one iota. If we had been afforded more time together, I am positive we eventually got married and led a well-adjusted life together.
I'm like, wait a minute.
Oh, movies out, huh?
I don't know. And last, I did not regret, even though I desired to. Leaving Anne with an unborn child and unmarried would strip her of all dignity as well as her virtuous moral fiber. I would feel guilty regarding that forever. I felt ease with myself and sense of peace within, and a resolve to dispute many setbacks to the contrary. I eventually did the right thing regarding Anne and me. Rather than take a conceited, egotistical attitude about our plight, I had taken a sensible and discerning approach to resolve our dilemma. It was not the easiest or the most gratifying solution, but served us better in the long run. In a final analysis, time would tell if our love would withstand the rigors of the coming events in our lives. If we could sustain ourselves and uphold our love for each other, we would be stronger for it and our love would mature and grow. If not, then our experience together would only be a treasured memory, fused together in a short period of time, and to eventually forgotten, and yet another more exciting and heartwarming interlude.
10 seconds. There we go. You ready to restart?
Yeah.